Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, January 13th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 232 days, the game against Michigan in 316 days. There is a lot to talk about with Ohio State football this week. We just talked to Kevin Noon on yesterday's show about the offensive line and 3 guys leaving, 1 guy coming back, and what that's all going to mean for this fall in terms of roster construction. Today, we're going to talk about what that might mean in terms of the offense. We're also going to take a little look back at the Peach Bowl and then look ahead at what the Ohio State offense might look like this fall. And we're going to do all of that with Buckeye Huddle's X's and O's guru, Ross Fulton. He just wrote another fantastic column this week titled Close, But, and you know the rest. It was the Buckeyes were very close. They very nearly beat Georgia, who very nearly made TCU a Division III team. So, you know, that Georgia almost is looking pretty good for Ohio State right now. Ross, let's start with Marvin Harrison Jr. Let's start with the positives for Ohio State. Marvin Harrison Jr. himself is a positive for Ohio State. He has done a lot of rather remarkable stuff with the ball in his hands. But you also wrote about how they not only took advantage of him in the passing game, but how they also took advantage of him, using him to open things up for other guys as well in the passing game. So what did they do there? How did they make that work? Yeah,
so obviously he had a lot of success early against Georgia. And so Georgia put a lot of effort into making sure that wouldn't happen. A lot of Georgia's game plan was predicated upon using a lot of fire zones, 5-man rushes with the zone behind it, which leaves you down a man in coverage. And so but then they also wanted to make sure that they had a safety over the top of Harrison. And so Ohio State really hurt Georgia by running Harrison vertically and then having a deep over or cross from the opposite side come underneath it. I think in addition to Harrison, I think that Emeka Egbuka was also healthy for the first time in a while, which made a big difference because he also had quite impact and was difficult in coverage running away from defenders. So, in terms of going into next year, you obviously start with those two, and you can see the difference when one of them wasn't there in the fourth quarter, what happens. And so teams are going to have to continue to do something of that nature on Harrison, which opens up a lot of things for the remaining players.
All right, so this is going to be sort of a stupid question, I think, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think you have an interesting answer to it. Hey, not having Marvin Harrison out there, that seemed bad. So what exactly how exactly did the loss of Marvin Harrison change things for the offense, especially with Cade Stover already out?
Yeah, it made it even easier for Georgia to send more rushers because they had, again, less concern about having, help or being able to roll coverage towards Harrison. It also allowed them to bracket Egbuka because, again, it gets difficult to bracket 2 guys. You can do it, but you can't really do it if you're bringing 5 or 6 guys. And so they could use concepts that more took away the inside receiver. Beyond all the obvious ones of not having the best player, on your offense on the field or second best with Stroud. And, I think that it jumped out, for instance, on the second down before the last missed field goal. Ohio State had a lot of success with running double slants all game particularly to get first downs. And, they had just hit Egbuka the drive before on one and they ran it again. And this time Georgia dropped their defensive end right in that inside passing lane. And so Stroud worked out the outside receiver who was in a one-on-one, except this time it was Xavier Johnson. And, I'm a big proponent of Xavier Johnson. I think that he should have a definitive role next year. He played great again against Georgia, but I don't think him being an outside receiver trying to outbody Keely Ringo is his best skill set. And, so just think about the difference that would have been on that play if that's Harrison instead of Johnson.
All right. So that's the pass game a little bit and some of the impact there. One thing that I thought, reading your article, I thought was very interesting was they had some changes in the run game and what they were doing in the Peach Bowl that you thought indicated Justin Fry, as he's sort of been a little bit bigger role with this offense this year and presumably taking a, even bigger role moving forward without Kevin Wilson there. Some things that you saw in that run game during the Peach Bowl that you thought indicated Justin Fry's increased influence there, and maybe some of the stuff they might be trying to do it moving forward. So can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as I pointed out, I think at times this year, Ohio State would benefit from a more diversified run game, and particularly one that could mix in gap blocking better, which counter Trey or counter GY, whatever you want to call it, is an example of. And so, however, I did say before the Georgia game that might not be the game to do it because of how well Georgia plays that. But nevertheless, they did. I would say that was probably, they probably ran that as much as they ran any kind of zone blocking scheme. And so, and they did a pretty good job. I mean, first, the running game was so limited because they're just down so many bodies. At running back is pretty crazy when you think about it. But, there was a lot more counter. There's some other diversified concepts. They did a couple quick pitches. They did the counter bash where they pulled two linemen one way and did a quick toss outside to Johnson the other. So, again, given the opponent and where you think they would maybe go, I was surprised to see that them use counter blocking so much. But to me, that indicates that if they're going to do it there, it would seem that it would be something that they're going to lean more into going forward next year, which I think will be a benefit. Not saying that they don't need to continue, they can't continue to run inside and outside zone, but I do think having a little bit more of a diversified scheme is going to help them.
So one of the questions moving forward is, okay, you've got, I think it's safe to say they had maybe 7 guys in the circle of trust on the offensive line. This is something we talked about with Kevin on yesterday's show. 3 of them are gone. So now you've got 4 guys left from the circle of trust. And, there's some uncertainty at tackle. What are you going to do at left tackle? Are you kicking Donovan Jackson outside? Are you going to find someone somewhere else on the team? And, I guess the change, there's 2 ways you could look at this. One is, how does the uncertainty and the questions along the offensive line change what Fry maybe wants to do next year or is able to do next year? Or, conversely, how does what Fry wants to do change what they need to be looking for, what they need to add either in the portal or what they need to find on the current roster? How do you go about, sort of diagnosing what that means in terms of the line and in terms of the play calling this fall?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you don't want it to impact the play calling, right? You don't want to have to do things to protect your offensive line. Now, the Georgia game was actually like a fairly good example of, in fact, doing that. To block Jalen Carter, they kept using, as I described in my article, a half roll play action concept where they basically would pull the guard or the center out to the end to block anything coming off the edge, and then have DeJuan Jones block down on Jalen Carter to create angles. So there are ways, obviously, to do things to help your offensive line out. Brian Day and really likes using 6 and 7 man protection schemes a lot if you can to help the offensive line too. So, with Fry, obviously you want guys, to the point about discussing counter. I mean, you want people that are able to pull, if possible, and are able to move laterally as well. I kind of think that Donovan Jackson, I guess we'll have to see it. He may, in fact, be a better tackle, I think, than as a guard. He may not have the ideal height, but I think his athleticism and maybe, I think he had some struggles at times this year at the point of attack against big defensive tackles, where that wouldn't be as much of an issue at defensive end. So I do think there are some options there. We'll have to see what it looks like in the spring game. I think they have the ability, or they have the players there potentially to do, what they want to do. And I don't think it's going to limit them as such, but obviously that is the point of uncertainty, because they have, absent CJ Stroud and Jackson Smith-Njigba, who didn't play this year, they have everyone back at the skill position. So that's quite a group of receivers and running backs to start off with as a foundation.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of toys to play with there for Brian Hartline and Justin Fry and Ryan Day and whoever ends up sort of having the play calling title and responsibility when they get all that stuff sorted out. But whoever that is, you had some suggestions on what you thought you wanted to see them try to do this fall, both in the run and the pass games. It might be a little bit different, a little bit of spin-offs of what they're doing or improvements on what they're doing or diversification on what they're doing. So can you share just some of the top level thoughts on stuff you'd like to see them incorporate this fall?
Yeah, well, and I think it does help both a quarterback and a young offensive line to be able to run the ball well. I think, as we've talked about, Ohio State's run game issues this year were at times over-exaggerated. Some of it was a short yardage issue. And, we saw that they were able to solve a lot of that against Georgia with the combination of being a little bit more diversified in short yardage, had pass plays and the like. But I do think, if you're coming off the ball, it can be easier on an offensive line. You don't obviously have the two tackles that you had that were such good pass blockers coming back. So, and you have a bunch of running backs who barely played this year, and you should be able to rely on them more. So I do think that's where the diversified run game, if you are going to run it a little bit more, will help so that you're not as predictable by tendency. People don't know that you're going to run stretch to the boundary in certain situations. So, and I think the gap run plays can help both Trayvon Henderson and Mayan Williams in the offensive line. So that's one part. And the other part is, continued reliance on some of those short timing routes. Like obviously they did gash Georgia downfield quite a bit. Like they hit those, 7-man protections, hit those deep over routes. And that's always should be a part of their offense. I mean, that's what makes them really dangerous to create explosive plays. But they help themselves by mixing that with some quick hitters, those double slants we just talked about, those sort of play action, sneak the receiver underneath the offensive line. When they hit a boot on for the one touchdown, other short routes, which again, both of these things will make them, teams have to defend the whole field, not be quite as predictable by formation. The other nice thing they did against Georgia was they used a lot of motion. That by doing that moved Marvin Harrison around and Emeka Egbuka without necessarily having to move Harrison per se. He starts out in the same spot, but you use fast motion and suddenly he becomes the slot receiver, quote unquote, because the guy is motioned outside of him. And so you want to change the launch points and make it more difficult for teams to be able to double him.
Well, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff to talk about between now and, even now and in the start of spring ball, let alone now and the start of the season. Between the personnel stuff and the scheme stuff, there's going to be, the lack of, some of the new spots that they have, new guys they got to fill in, and new play calling and all that fun stuff is just new opportunities for us to talk about new stuff and new and exciting stuff. Who doesn't like new Ohio State football stuff? And the place to find all of it is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. I'll put a link to Ross's latest article in the post for this on the front page of the Buckeye Huddle page, BuckeyeHuddle.com, for the post for this podcast, because there's a lot of really, really good stuff in there, little videos, little GIFs, all sorts of little video clips and stuff like that. So you can actually sort of see the stuff in action. And, I'm not going to lie, I end up watching some of that stuff 3-4 times to make sure I'm really understanding, really seeing what I'm seeing there. So it's a great way to do it, and a great place to do it, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.